We wanted to provide an opportunity for you guys to ask questions if you wanted, because it really is very important that we have a chance to go over some of the COVID protocols that we're putting in place for, I think, very obvious reasons. But before we jump into that material, I'll introduce myself, and then Tom, who's our program coordinator, and will be running the show on Saturdays. Introduce ourselves, and then we'll get into the material. I have a very terrible PowerPoint that is mostly text that I'm going to be going through, and a few other things that I'm going to be showing you guys. And feel free to ask questions, to jump in, and we'll do our best to answer everything as best we can. So a little bit about myself. My name is Jeff Teutsch. For those of you that have been with the program before, or are even remotely involved in orienteering, you probably know my name, if not know me personally. I have been around in the orienteering community heavily for about 10 years now, working a lot with Orienteering Ottawa, but run my own business as a contractor coach, make some of the orienteering maps that we use. So working with Orienteering Canada, just recently started with them in the role of high performance director with the national team. And I've been running the programs that Tom is now running for 3 or 4 years now, and I'm helping transition Tom into that role this year. And unfortunately, this year is extra challenging because of the COVID pandemic, of course. But Tom has been doing a great job in getting things up and going for this fall. So that said, Tom, do you want to say a few words about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Thomas Graham. I've been with Orienteering Ottawa for a very long time. Until recently, I was just an orienteer. I'm on Canada's high performance program. I've done a lot of national and international competitions. And for this season, or a few seasons ago, I started coaching these youth programs. And for this season, Jeff was gracious enough to offer me the position of program coordinator. And Jeff's sort of been helping me over all the hurdles, of which there are many this year. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So let's jump in here. I'm going to share my screen, which has my my PowerPoint presentation on it, and we will get started. So we have about an hour to go through roughly 30 slides here, and a few topics that we want to talk about here. We're going to spend, well, we have already spent 5 minutes on our introduction, but there's a few more things we'll touch on before we really get into some of the important material, which is going to be a large part of our morning on the COVID protocols that we are asking everybody to follow, and then talk a little bit about our sign-in and sign-out practices, which are going to be slightly different than they have been in the past. Talk a little bit about some safe sport practices, and if you're not familiar with that term or that concept, that is totally understandable and expected. We'll get into that when we get there. Little bit, just really brief, talking about the lesson plans that you guys are going to be provided with as volunteers. Then touching on a few program policies. We won't go through our entire policy manual, but there's a couple of them that I do want to go through with you, and wrap up if we have time, which we should. That's the goal. Talk a little bit about some really basic instruction tips. This is not a lesson on how to coach orienteering, but a few tips that might make your life easier. So first off, this is information that we've had on our website. We had it on our a little bit on our registration page as well. So something you should be familiar with. But going through the roles here, we have our group instructors, which are mostly experienced orienteers that Tom has recruited to help kind of lead and teach the orienteering to the groups. So they're responsible for delivering the program material that's in the lesson plan that Tom will be putting together. And the other key thing this year is ultimately they are responsible for ensuring the group is maintaining social distancing, masks as appropriate, and generally staying safe. And then the group assistants are helping out the group instructors. So they are going to be working with the group instructors for delivering the material and maintaining COVID protocols, but largely making sure that no kids are getting lost, marshalling kids when and where needed, as per the instructor's wishes, and just generally keeping the program running smoothly. So if you're not familiar with orienteering much or at all, then that's perfectly fine. You're not expected to. Hopefully you can pick up a little bit throughout the program. But with the help of the group instructors, you can hopefully sort of stand at a certain point and make sure that the kids are going the right direction and that sort of thing. And then finally, we like to have a location assistant for each of our sessions, which is really kind of standing at the meeting point there where we have some equipment, some of it somewhat expensive, that we kind of leave out, and so it's nice to have somebody on site for that to help maybe point people in the right direction if they're running late, because unlike a soccer practice where we're on the soccer pitch and you show up late while the group is still there, we disappear off into the woods for an hour and a half. And so the location assistant is hopefully can help point people in the right direction. We do provide instructions on where the different groups are going to be at the start of each session. So the location assistant should be able to use that to help with that. And then finally, they also, you sometimes get people coming up and saying, hey, what's going on? What is this? And so it's nice to have a friendly face there that can answer that and give a little bit of information, at least at a very basic level, about what it is we're doing, maybe point them to the website and that kind of thing. So now I want to really jump into the meat of our presentation here, which is the COVID information. So I don't think any of this is going to be new to anybody. We've all been dealing with COVID for 6 months now. But we're obviously asking everybody to wear masks when we're collected in groups. So when families are checking in at the start, we're asking that everybody wear a mask then, and as well at the end when the families are picking kids up. And when you're providing instructions to the entire group. So at the starting location, we'll be marking it off where each group is going to be meeting, nicely spaced out, and then we'll be marking within that sort of our 2 meter spaced out markers. And so when an instructor is standing there providing instructions to the entire group, we ask that they wear a mask at that point. And then specifically when you're providing assistance or instructions to participants in smaller groups out on course or in the woods or whatever, we strongly encourage you to wear masks. And also when distancing rules are unable to be followed for whatever reason. Again, fairly common sense stuff. We've all kind of gotten used to wearing masks, but important to really reiterate that nonetheless. And so the next piece is distancing. Again, we're all, I think, pretty familiar with the standard distancing rules these days, which is normally 2 meters distant. So under standard distancing protocol, that's what we're expecting. When you're providing instruction to the full group of kids that you have, we ask that you stand a little bit further back 5 meters, because you are going to be speaking and projecting. And even though you're wearing a mask, we just ask that there's a little bit of extra caution in that situation there in terms of distancing. So pretty straightforward. Obviously, in outstanding circumstances, if somebody's requiring first aid or whatever, you do what you have to do. Again, put the mask on if you need to be in that kind of a situation where you are closer than 2 meters. But in general, if you're providing instruction, if you can try to stand that 2 meters back and still provide the instruction that you need to provide. We will be providing as much as possible larger blown up maps so that you can kind of hold the map up and point at, okay, we're going from here to over here type of thing. And it's visible to the kids from that 2 meters away, rather than having to go in and look at the detail that's printed quite small on the maps that they will be holding. So, quick pause before I get into some of the really orienteering specific stuff. Any questions so far? Okay. I will take that silence as a no. If somebody was muted and was trying to ask questions, just jump in. So, specific to orienteering, a couple comments about the maps that participants are going to be using. For everyone's kind of reassurance, we'll be bagging the maps well in advance and then providing them in a bin or on a clipboard rather than handing them out, just to minimize the contact and to provide that kind of 24 hours for any COVID virus to die because it can't last on the surface all that long. We do ask that when these maps are distributed to the participants, that one volunteer take that on for your group. Rather than handing it out and having more people touching the maps. And we ask that the kids, you do not have the kids come to you. I know, especially with the younger kids, that might be hard to control, but as much as possible, if we can have you ask them to stay where they are and you approach them and give the maps out one by one, because otherwise you get 5 kids coming to you all at once. And it becomes a little bit of chaos, and the distancing concept goes out the window. And then finally, oftentimes the kids will drop the maps, leave them there, give them back. We're encouraging participants as much as possible to just take the maps home at the end of the session, again, to minimize that contact and transfer of materials back and forth. And so they can take them home and they can keep them. In orienteering, we always encourage people to keep their maps as a bit of a souvenir, or they can look over them afterwards, or whatever they might do with them. Of course, many of them will not keep them, and that's totally fine as well. And then the next big topic here is the sport event timing equipment. So for those of you that have done the program before or are regulars with the club at our events, you're well aware of what sport event is, but it's an electronic timing system, which Tom is actually going to demonstrate in a minute. And again, it's physical equipment. We're asking to minimize the touch as much as possible. Each participant will have an SI timing chip. It's an electronic timing chip that you strap to your finger. So obviously there's contact needed there, but again, try to keep the contact to a minimum when you hand them out. If a kid needs help putting it on, you can help them put it on, absolutely. At the end of the session, we want them to just drop them in a bin. Again, no contact, and then we'll deal with those afterwards. And then when it comes to printing the results, we're asking that one volunteer handle that, and we try to keep it as controlled as possible, so we don't have kids walking in, touching everything, trying to grab their little chip printout with their times and results on it. So we're going to take a pause here from my share screen, and Tom is going to do a little bit of a demo of what the sport event equipment looks like, what we're asking volunteers and participants to do here, and then we'll go back to my slides.
Thanks, Jeff. Okay, so for those of you who haven't seen this, so this is what we mean by SI timing chip. So all the participants, all the kids are going to have one of these. So they're going to be given one at the beginning of the session, and they're a bit hard to figure out for some of our younger participants. So what you do is you slide your hand through that wrist strap, pull that tight so it hangs off the wrist. So if it falls off, it stays on the wrist, because these things are very expensive and we don't want kids losing them. And then there's this black, smaller elastic there. You can slide your finger through that. It can either be your index or your middle finger. It stays on like that. So how the timing works is, this is what a control looks like. So it's got a nice orange and white flag, so you can see it from a distance. And at the top is a timing box. So how it logs your time is the participant will come and they'll just put their chip into the hole. It will beep, flash like that, and they're good to go to the next control. So we want to make sure they're not, putting their hands all over it. Sometimes, because they're stuck into the ground like this, they can kind of sway a little bit. So sometimes runners will kind of grab it to stabilize it and then put it in. So we want to avoid that as much as possible. So these are designed in such a way that you can kind of curl your finger like that, stick it in, and so contact is kept to an absolute minimum. We also have, so when they finish their race, they will get a printout that shows their time and their split times. So this is what the printer system looks like. So again, without touching the box, they'll come up to it, just stick it in. That'll get their time. So when they're finished with it, we are going to have just a bin, like this, where the child will take off their ident and just, a volunteer will come by, maybe hold it near them, and they'll just toss it in.
If they have their own chips, should they bring them or not? If they have their own idents, or is it easier to just have everybody use those ones?
Jeff, what do you think?
I would say, specifically given COVID, I would say if they have their own, they are more than welcome to bring them, but they certainly don't have to. We're going to be giving the timing chips out, and we're going to be setting our programs up each week in such a way that we're not going to be reusing them with another group. Again, just to minimize the contact from one person to another. In the past, we've had a group at 5 o'clock on a Tuesday evening. They use the timing chips, and then they put them back in the bin. And then a group at 6:30 uses them again. We're going to be avoiding that. We have smaller groups now, so we have enough timing equipment that everybody can have their own. But we will be collecting them back at the end of the session. So if they have their own, they're welcome to use them, but don't feel you have to if you're worried that your 6-year-old is gonna lose it or something like that.
Can I ask, where can you buy one? Because I think it would be great. I would love to just get one for us if it's possible and feasible now. But also, how do you know which chip goes with which kid? Which might not be. Maybe I'll just email you this question. But like when you're running a marathon, you're registered for it. Like, how do you know?
Yeah. So you're in terms of buying them, you can buy them from a website called ostore.ca, o-store.ca. If you Google Orienteering Store Canada, you will find them. And it's actually a local store run by my parents, as it turns out. And they have a full selection there, and you can send them an email, whatever, if you have any questions. In terms of your second question, we give them out at random each week. and the name is not associated with them. It has a number on it, and when they print it out, they will get them. This is for the kids program. For our events, you get registered into a computer system, and we then associate the name with it when you register and when we give you the chip. So, fair questions. All right, back to the slideshow here. There. So there we go. There's my next slide. So a couple of other comments on our COVID protocols. In general, we want to be keeping contact to a minimum. And if you are, we encourage you to use hand sanitizer before and after you're touching whatever it is you're touching. We will be providing a bottle of hand sanitizer for each of our volunteers, and we are asking that you carry them with you, just to play things on the safe side there. I'm not expecting this to be the case, but if required, we will remove either participants or volunteers if you are blatantly not following COVID protocols. Obviously, common sense comes into play. If something happens because somebody's forgetful or whatever, that's, give a few warnings. But certainly if somebody is causing a serious risk to the group's health and safety, then we will step in and do what we need to do to keep everybody else safe. So the next piece that I want to talk about is, again, related to COVID. We are asking, well, no, not asking, we are requiring that every participant and every volunteer bring a signed declaration of health waiver, which we will be emailing out to every single session. This is not something you sign once at the beginning. This is something you sign every single time. And this is something that is being required of us from Orienteering Canada, our national sport organization. And I will show you the form in a second. We're asking that it be provided, signed within 24 hours of the start of the session, and then dropped in a bin, and we will have a volunteer from each group. So one of you getting verbal confirmation from them at the same time that they do not have a positive COVID diagnosis, they have not demonstrated symptoms in the past 14 days, and they have not been traveling out of country in the past 14 days. Pretty standard things. You've probably heard them in numerous scenarios. So we're going to be doing something very, very similar. Along with the Declaration of Health forms, we'll have a volunteer that will be signing kids in on we have a standard sign-in form, and then signing them out again at the end. We are asking for parent presence when the kids are signed out, so they're not wandering off to the parking lot and then go home with a friend, or we want somebody to say, hey, I am here meeting my kid, because otherwise it's very easy to lose track and have kids wander off. Quick note, we are asking that only one parent show up with their kids to drop them off and pick them up, just to minimize the number of bodies present. We don't want a whole family with 2 parents and a sibling showing up and hanging around. So I am going to now pull up the Declaration of Health waiver. Just going to show it really, really briefly. It's an Orienteering Canada form, and pretty simple: name, parent or guardian name, email, phone number at the top, and a signature and a date down at the bottom. So again, this has to be filled out every Friday afternoon or Saturday morning, and then brought with you. We are asking that folks print them off and fill them out at home and then bring them to us. We will have some printed copies in case anybody forgets. Our intention is not allow them to participate because they forgot it at home, but we are certainly encouraging them to fill it out on their own, again, so that we're not sharing pens and paper and that kind of a thing. So the next topic that we're going to spend a bit of time on here is the safe sport. So safe sport it's a relatively new concept, but within the sporting world, it's become a hot topic of conversation. And I'm sure you have all heard in the news over the past half a dozen years, far too frequent stories of abuse of kids by coaches in various formats, whether it's sexual abuse or harassment or malfeasance, mistreatment, etc. And so safe sport is rapidly becoming a requirement for sport organizations and clubs to have these policies in place to protect participants, athletes, volunteers, and coaches alike. And Orienteering Canada and also Orienteering Ottawa are working on putting these in place. We were working on this in the spring, and then our priorities changed. And so we're a little further behind on putting these policies in place than we would like. But we have actually had for several years some volunteer screening forms. And so there's two forms. One is the screening disclosure form, which asks if you have any convictions, criminal charges, other sanctions, any out-of-court settlements related to orienteering or other coaching. And then there's an offense declaration form, which is a form where you can list your convictions for offenses. Hopefully we don't need any of those particular forms filled out. But we're asking that everybody fill out either the screening disclosure form, or if you have any offenses, fill out the offense declaration form. And we will review those, and if there's any problematic anything that comes up, we will ask that you not volunteer. We won't let you volunteer. Again, keeping the kids safe is our top priority. So this is the screening disclosure form. It's a couple of pages long. It looks like a big deal, but hopefully you can say no to all of these. Have you ever been convicted of a crime? No. Are there any criminal charges outstanding against you? No. And then you don't have to fill out much more than checking no on all of those. The offense declaration form is a one-page form, fairly straightforward as well, and gives an opportunity to list any offenses that you have been convicted of. So again, hopefully you don't need to fill that out, but these are policies that are in place, sort of just in case, to catch anything that might come up.
Do we have to do police checks?
We are asking police checks of our coaches that are sort of leading the groups, but we are not asking for police records checks from everybody, because we recognize that we need to balance how much screening we're doing with actually encouraging people to volunteer. If we asked for a full police records check from everybody, we wouldn't have anybody volunteer. So we're trying to kind of strike a bit of a balance there. So there's lots I could go into in safe sport, but the other big piece that I want to talk about a little bit is this concept of the rule of two. And the goal of the rule of two, I'll get into the details in a minute, but the goal is to ensure that all interactions between coaches and participants and communications are open, observable, and justifiable. And so this rule of two is designed to protect participants, especially minors, but also coaches, volunteers, and the organization themselves. And so if something goes wrong, particularly in orienteering, it's easy to see you're out. You've got some coach that their screening has missed something. They're out in the woods, and with an individual participant, there's lots of chance for something to go wrong. And there's also a chance for false accusations to be made, right? And that's where the rule of two protects the coaches from any false accusations, because there's somebody there that can vouch for what happened, or whatever it may be. And so I've got on my slide here some good implementation practices. So you can read that in the PDF document we'll mail out, or if you want to review our presentation afterwards. But I'm actually going to switch now to an infographic made available by the Coaching Association of Canada, which shows much better than anything I could put together the key tenets of the rule of two. And so the basic idea here is that you should never be alone with an athlete. So one coach, one athlete, and the bottom left here is a no-no. Acceptable would be one coach with two athletes, particularly older athletes. Minor athletes, you try to avoid that situation. Better again is one trained coach and one screened adult, so one volunteer with one athlete, or more athletes, of course. But kind of the gold standard here would be to have two fully trained and screened coaches with an athlete at all times. We're not really in a position to have that. We don't have a lot of trained coaches. We do need to provide more training opportunities for our coaches and instructors. But just keep that in mind when you're interacting with participants. And so a couple of the implementation practices, as I've already mentioned, a coach should never be alone and out of sight with an individual participant without another screened volunteer of some kind present. The training environment should be open to observation, so we don't want to be turning parents away. That's obviously an immediate red flag that something is wrong if the parents aren't allowed to observe what their children are doing. We're not in this situation where we're going to be driving with participants, but ensure that a participant is riding in a vehicle with, again, a trained coach and a second screened adult, never one-on-one. Also, and this is mostly on us, but considering the gender of the participants when selecting our coaches and our volunteers. So you don't want to have an all-male staff of coaches and volunteers for a girls' soccer team, for example. And then when it comes to online communication, we should be copying a group or copying parents when we are contacting particularly minor participants. And again, you then have a record. You then you can't be accused of any kind of misbehavior or falsely accused of any misbehavior there, because there is that record of it that the parent is being copied on. So hopefully that's all fairly straightforward, and hopefully we don't ever get ourselves into a situation where we need to worry about this stuff. But at the same time, it is super important that we are keeping everybody safe. That comes before any amount of learning about orienteering, anything else in terms of our priorities. So before I move on here, there's an online 90-minute online training available at safesport.coach.ca. We are not making it mandatory, but we are certainly looking at making that mandatory for all of our coaches and volunteers in the future. We encourage you to take it though, because it's a fantastic module. It's got a mix of written material, video testimony from athletes and coaches alike, covers a number of key safe sport topics, including the rule of two, definitions of maltreatment, malpractice, etc., things to be looking out for, what are the red flags, all of that kind of stuff in there. And so if you are at all interested, I do strongly encourage you to take that training. And if you are interested in taking that training and do take it, we just ask that you let us know, just so that we can keep a record of who has taken it and who hasn't. Not to judge anybody that hasn't, but so that when it becomes mandatory in future years, we will have a record of who has already taken it. Because this is not something we will be asking you to take every single year. So if you go to the website safesport.coach.ca, you get here, and you'll want to look at this, take the safe sport training. You take the training, takes you to this page here, and then you can use this link to take the training. You will need to have a Locker account, which is a Coaching Association of Canada database, essentially, where they track what courses coaches have taken, because there's all sorts of different coaching courses that you can take through coach.ca, and this will allow you to record that, save your position in the course if you wish to do it in 2 or 3 sessions and not do it in an hour and a half straight. You can do that, log back in, and start off where you left off last time. So safesport.coach.ca, an absolutely excellent resource. I highly encourage anybody to take it for coaching with us. If you're coaching in any other sports or interacting with minors in just about any way, it's a really good tool to have at your disposal to have that knowledge of what some of that looks like. So moving on, I'm going to touch very briefly on lesson plans. And Tom, if you want to say a little bit more about this, you're welcome to jump in. But I'm going to speak from my experience when I was in the role that Tom is in now, creating lesson plans. And so Tom will be writing lesson plans each week and have them emailed out to all of our coaches and volunteers on the Thursday before our Saturday sessions. So we'll be emailing them out using MailChimp. So just a heads up, it's a mailing list server. They may not show up in your primary inbox. If you're using Gmail, for example, it may show up in updates. If you've got it set up that way, we'll be sending out one lesson plan for both the 11 o'clock and the 1 o'clock session. So it's going to be list sort of a schedule for your group with a time relative to the start, rather than saying, okay, you're going to be doing this at 11:30. It's going to be half an hour after you start. So just a note about that. It includes maps covering where all the groups will be, and obviously the maps with the courses on them that you'll be doing with your group. And it's got a full lesson plan for each group. So you only really need to look at the lesson plan portion for your individual group. And we ask that you put your own lesson plan or have it with you on your phone. We will not be providing printed lesson plans for everybody. So when you get your lesson plan on Thursday, particularly if you're going to be one of our instructors taking on the bulk of the actual teaching, we encourage you to think about what the goals are for the session. Think in advance about how you'll actually teach the lesson. The lesson plans will state sort of what the goal is and provide what we have set up. We will have it all set up in advance for you. So I encourage you to think about how you'll approach teaching that particular skill or leading them through whatever the activity is. And for our instructors, think a little bit about how you'll use, I hate the way that's phrased, but how you'll use the parent volunteers to help you with that. So whether you want to divide the group up, if you've got volunteers that are comfortable with that, or you want to use them as marshals so that kids don't get lost at certain points on the activity, whatever it may be. And think a little bit about warm up and cool down activities. We'll be modifying how we approach some of the warm up and cool downs in particular, but all of our activities because of COVID. But in general, yeah, think about how you're going to structure all of that. So I'm going to switch back to a PDF document again here and give you guys a sample lesson plan. So this is from the second week of our spring session in 2019, and so it's a 20-page lesson plan because we had multiple groups, including an adult group, which we don't have this fall. You see I start here with an overview where I've highlighted a number of different areas, and that's so that we can refer to them and say where each group is going to be. So here's a schedule for each group. You see where they're going to be. The location assistants, which I mentioned at the beginning, will have this, and they can point to where each group is going to be if somebody shows up late. And then we get into the actual lesson plan. So we have fundamentals one of our groups here, a little bit of info about the warm-up. The first activity is what we call the feature hunt. So where is it taking place? Some basic instructions for the coaches, some additional tips, set up notes if there's any. In this case, everything will just be set up. What those goals are, so you can think about that. Those are kind of the things that we really want you to touch on when you're teaching it. Other things are secondary. And then the maps for the activity, and going on to the rest of the session with the second activity here for that group, and then ending with a cool down. And remember a note to make sure that everyone is properly signed out at the end of that. So then we have the fundamentals 2 lesson plan, which is another several pages. Learn to train 1, again, another several pages. And so you definitely don't need to read through all 20 pages of the lesson plan, but jump to your group and you can print off the relevant pages for your particular group. So Tom, I don't know if you have anything you want to add there, but I'll just give you a chance to add anything if there is something.
Yeah, I think you've covered everything really well, Jeff. Unless there are specific questions, I don't have anything else to add at the moment.
How are the kids going to be divided this year? I know things are different. Is it by age?
Not, well, sort of. So we gave families the option this year if they want specifically all their family members to be kept together. So inevitably we have 6-year-olds and 13-year-olds in the same group. We've done our best to have so for that group, for example, it was more like we had to put the 6-year-old into a group of, 10, 13. So we at least made sure that we had other kids of similar ages in that group. So maybe 3 6-year-olds and then older groups. We were able to make most of them fairly even, like within 3 years of age. But that was one of the main challenges this year, was figuring out the groups and making sure our coaches are giving all of the kids, regardless of their age, an enjoyable experience.
Yeah, and we'll actually touch on that a little bit at the end,
Okay.
very briefly. That is going to be one of the challenges for everybody, managing those groups with the vastly different ages.
Okay.
So we have a complete policy manual. There's a link that I've got on my shared screen here. But I want to touch on 2 of our policies we'll be asking you to keep in mind as you're coaching. And again, hopefully they're not needed. Two that I want to touch on are our behavior policy and our safety, some of our safety and injury policy. So the behavior policy is again, hopefully this doesn't become an issue, but we're expecting all participants to contribute to the program in a positive manner by treating fellow participants with respect and positive encouragement and not yelling at, insulting, hitting, or otherwise making another participant feel uncomfortable in any way. Listening to and following instructions from coaches and program volunteers, respecting any and all differences in gender, age, race, religion, and ability of all program participants, coaches, and program volunteers, and not engaging in any behavior on purpose or accidentally which puts themselves or another participant, coach, or program volunteer in danger of physical harm. So nothing that you wouldn't expect, but probably the more important aspect of this policy is how we follow up in case of a behavioral incident. So failure to adhere to the above standards of behavior will have the following consequences: a warning from a coach or volunteer along with a discussion as to why their behavior is inappropriate, and if the warning has little or no effect, a notification to the parent guardian by the head coach, either in person when the child is picked up or via email or phone. So that's kind of step one. If the problematic behavior is an ongoing issue or puts anyone in danger, the participant will be asked to sit out during the activity or session, and the parent guardian will be contacted by the head coach. In serious cases where the problem is not able to be resolved by items 1 and 2, the participant may be removed from the program and asked not to return. No refunds will be provided. Any incident where a parent guardian is contacted will be recorded and kept confidentially by the head coach, i.e. Tom. If you see something and you're not sure how to respond to it, we ask that, first of all, that you do your best, but also that you let Tom know on site so that he can help resolve the issue and deal with that. So that's our policy. In my experience over the past 3 years, I don't think there's been 1 or 2 minor incidents where I've had to pull kids aside and talk to them, but nothing that has escalated beyond that. So I don't anticipate this being a particular issue, but it's an important one that you are aware of, at the very least, that we have that policy in place. And so the next one that I want to talk about, well, actually, before I go on to our next policy, a couple of comments about your role as a group coach or instructor or volunteer. So know a little bit what is inappropriate or problematic behavior. Unfortunately, we don't have time to really go into this topic. To give the warning, have the discussion with kids, maybe pull them aside to have that conversation. Don't have that conversation in front of everyone. Let a volunteer take the rest of the group and do an activity so you can have that discussion in a more productive manner. Inform Tom of the issue. Help fill out incident report forms. So Tom will take that, but obviously if he wasn't there on site when the issue took place, they'll need to consult with whoever was on site to actually fill out the form. And then if there's any follow-up needed, we're obviously responsible to give consistent information about what happened. So the next policy I want to talk about here is our safety and injury policy. And I've got a whole bunch of text here. But the bottom line is that we have a form that we need to fill out whenever there's a relatively serious incident. If a kid falls and scrapes a knee and they need a Band-Aid, we're not going to fill out an incident report for every time that happens, because we'd be filling out a heck of a lot of forms for that. And so a little bit about, I'll show the form in a minute, but a little bit about the group coach's role. in this instance, first of all, use your common sense. Keep an eye out for risks and to modify activities as appropriate. So if you see that, oh, whoops, we're about to walk through some poison ivy, well, avoid doing that. We'll do our best to avoid those areas in the first place when we set up the activities. But if you see something that we've missed, you have every right and in fact the responsibility to avoid those risky situations in the first place. We ask that you remind parents at the start of the season in particular about tick checks if there's going to be ticks around. So those of you that have orienteered regularly are well aware of what that involves and what that means. We'll be providing some tick info sheets to all the volunteers and all the participants next week before the program starts. And then, of course, deal with any injuries as needed. Each group will be provided with a little first aid kit in any pack that they will have with them. We will have a more extensive first aid kit at the meeting location that you can use if needed. Of course, first aid is first priority in case of a serious injury. Call 911 is the next step, and then contact the program coordinator so that we can deal with the implications on our end after any immediate first aid and then contact it. And then fill out the incident report once everybody has a chance to breathe if there's a more serious incident. So I've had to fill out, I think, 2 incident report forms in the past 3 or 4 years. So it's not common, thankfully. We ask that an incident report be filled out in the case of a behavioral issue when a warning it doesn't solve it. If an injury requires first aid, or if parents should be informed about a behavioral issue or an injury, we use that as a marker for when a form should be filled out as well. If there's a risk that there's complications down the road from any of this, then we want to have that incident report so that we can rely on that record of the incident. So the incident report forms themselves would be filled out and then sent to the program coordinator, i.e. Tom, within 24 hours of the incident. And I want to stress that the program coordinator, part of his role is to help you fill this form out if it needs to be filled out. So don't stress over having to do this. Tom can help walk you through that form. So here's the accident report form, and you'll see I'm filling out a sample here. Hopefully it's fairly straightforward. Location of accident, what the activity was. We provide this both the first and the last name of whoever was injured, which could be one or, in certain circumstances, multiple. If 2 kids have collided or whatever. Ages can be filled out later. Like, we have the record of the age, the address, the sex. So we don't require you to fill out all of that information. We don't expect you to know all of that information, of course. But the things that need to be filled out sort of before people head home is the location of the accident, what happened, the name of the individuals involved. So if there are witnesses, we want a record of who witnessed the incident so that, again, we can follow up in case we need to follow up. We ask that you get the witness phone numbers when you fill the form out so that we can contact them. Fill out time of incident, time of first intervention, time of medical support. Again, we want to have a record of everything that happened, description of the event, et cetera, et cetera. So it should be fairly self-explanatory when you get to actually filling this out. The bottom portion here, staff information, is the section that has to be filled out by Tom at the end of all of this. So the sign that he has reviewed the form. So we're basically at almost at our hour here. So I'm going to pause for a second, give all of you a chance to ask any questions you may have, and then we'll spend a few minutes wrapping up with a couple of basic instruction tips, which do not go into any kind of detail as to teaching orienteering, but maybe a few pointers that you have thought of that can help your interaction with the kids that you're working with. So, any questions? All right, I will take that as I was extremely clear. Everything is super obvious and everything is going to go entirely smoothly.
Can I just ask one question quickly?
Absolutely.
Wait, when will we find out what role you want us to take?
So Tom is going to be contacting you all early next week to confirm where we'd like you to help out.
Okay.
And you'll have a chance to have a bit of back and forth on that. And if you have any specific questions about your individual role, you can do that. We don't assign roles too early in the process because as we get more kids signing up, we have to juggle the groups and all of that, right? So we need to wait until the programs are at least mostly filled up before we can assign those roles.
Okay, thanks.
Good question. All right, so the basic instruction tips here, I've just got a set of 6, again, basic tips. Try to be aware of the general skill level of the kids that you are teaching. And that goes sort of along with age. Just have a general sense so that you can teach to their level, right? You're trying to teach to them, not teach to adults. We're teaching kids that are new to these skills. So be positive and encouraging, especially when the kids are having trouble with a skill. When the kids are having trouble and they are getting frustrated, that is no time for you to get frustrated at them or with them, or that just exacerbates the problem. We want to be calming them down, giving them positive encouragement, and encouraging them to try again. Especially with the younger kids, keep your explanations simple and to the point. This is not about getting into a whole lot of detail about how to do skill X, Y, or Z. Especially this fall, it's really about having them get outside and having fun. And so if we can keep the explanations really simple, short and to the point, so that we can get on with the activity and get them out in the woods, then that is fantastic. The next tip I have here is demonstrate what you're wanting the kids to do. So you can explain for half an hour, but sometimes a simple 30-second demo of what you are wanting them to do will get the point across far more clearly. So hold the map in front of you and show what you're wanting them to actually physically do. Goes a long way. And then set expectations. So as part of the explanation of how to do the skill, set what you're expecting of them in terms of being able to accomplish this. A lot of the things that we're teaching, they're not going to learn it in 5 minutes. It's going to take a few tries. Set that expectation that, hey, you're not going to get this perfect. That's not the goal here. And finally, keep it fun. It doesn't matter what we teach the kids. If they're not having fun and they don't come back, then first of all, they're not going to learn anything. But if they're not going to continue, then why are we bothering in the first place? Right? We want them to enjoy what they're doing. We want them to enjoy orienteering, being in the woods, getting that physical activity, spending time with friends, and then they want to come back. And if they learn anything in the process, then fantastic. But even if they don't, at least they're getting enjoyment out of it, and that's really what counts. And specific to this season, I want to throw in a few additional suggestions for dealing with the age range. So we had this question come up earlier. this year, we're largely keeping siblings together, so we have some wider gaps in age range than we normally do. Normally, we have sort of our fundamentals program for 6 to 9 year olds, our learn to train program for 9 to 12, whereas this year we're kind of grouping everybody together so that we can keep those family bubbles together. So tip number 1 would be to split your group into smaller groups and rely on your volunteers to lead. If you've got a group of 8 kids and you've got 3 6-year-olds and 3 10-year-olds and a group in the middle, see if you can ask your volunteers to, hey, can you take the group of 6-year-olds and do the activity with them? And can you take the group of 10-year-olds and do the activity with them? Allows you to sort of focus in on that and have the kids with their peers. On a related note, you can also split the group into the smaller groups and then provide instructions to those smaller groups one at a time. So you might say, hey, the 10-year-olds, you guys go off and do a lap around the park and come back in 5 minutes while I explain to the younger kids. And then you can send the younger kids off with a volunteer and have them go and do the activity at the level that they are ready to do the activity. And then when the older kids come back, you can give your instructions to them, which would be a modified version at that slightly more experienced, slightly older skill level. And they can go and do the activity in the format that is appropriate for them. So when we put our lesson plans together, we are going to be keeping that in mind, that there's a wider age range doing those activities. And as much as possible, we'll try to incorporate some specific tips for how to modify the particular activity. So if the 6-year-olds are getting something out of it and the 10-year-olds are getting something out of that same activity. Tip number 3 here, depending on the kids you have, you may be able to ask the older, more experienced kids to actually help provide some of the instruction to the younger kids. It's a great way for them to feel like they're contributing, which builds their self-worth. And they also learn something from trying to explain the activity as opposed to just hearing the explanation and doing it themselves. They can kind of learn in a bit of a different way that way because they have to process the information a little bit differently. And finally, again, keep things simple and keep things fun. That's the bottom line, is that this is supposed to be enjoyable, and if the kids are getting frustrated, then none of it really matters. And so you can kind of dumb things down, keep them really really basic, and hopefully we can get create an orienteering experience that everybody can enjoy. The younger kids, the older kids, and the instructors and volunteers alike. So that's all I've got for my slide here. And we are also at the sort of end of our time, but I do have another sort of 5 minutes or so. If anybody has any final questions that you want, you're welcome to ask them. Otherwise, I will see you all either tomorrow if you're coming out to the club event at Nakutok, or next week at our first session. So any questions, or Tom, if you want to jump in and provide any information, we have a few more minutes to do that.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for questions. Again, you've covered pretty much everything, so.
Good job on the explanations, and thank you for getting the program going.
Well,
Thanks, Linda.
Thank you for that, Linda, and thank you to all for taking the time to attend. I do want to stress that we can't run these programs without you guys as volunteers. So I really appreciate that, and appreciate you taking the time to kind of learn a little bit about how to help us run the programs effectively.